Welcome to The War in Heaven. I am Austin Hepworth. I'm here along with Michael Hepworth, and today we are going to talk some about pain and suffering. Maybe not the most um, pleasant topic at all times, but it's one that's super important because we do live in this world, we experience it, and it's one of the natural questions that arise about why does a God that supposedly loves us, why does he allow suffering and pain? And to be clear on this, we see at least two kind of broad categories of sources of pain. One source of pain is from other humans, meaning humans made a decision, they did something to us, and they hurt us. Another source of pain and suffering comes simply from nature, from this world. There can be lightning strikes, fires, earthquakes, there can be floods, there can be cancer, that type of thing that we as humans aren't necessarily in control of. And so we are going to talk in two parts about this. Today we're going to focus on more the human side of things. And in the next episode, we'll focus more on nature, more natural causes, and why some of that may exist. And so as we go through and discuss these principles today, I think the biggest thing to understand is that we are starting from a place where we believe strongly in a God who loves us. And our discussion is centered around then why would he allow us to experience pain and suffering? And what is it that lets it so he doesn't just step in and stop all of the abuse, all of the issues that come up, all of the human on human violence, and different things that take place. And it's certainly, when we talk about these issues, we want you to understand we're very sensitive to the reality that many people have gone through with the things they have suffered or endured at the hands of others, and we're not trying to minimize that in any way. And so at any point in our discussion, if you ever feel that that is happening, no, that's not our intent, that we have significant respect and also sorrow for the fact that humans have suffered some incredible things through their lives. And there's many people who have endured through those. And so if you are one of those, and we certainly commend you for still persevering, still pushing forward, still working to overcome any challenges or heartaches that you've experienced in your life. But again, we certainly believe that even with what humans may do to humans, God still loves us. And we believe that his plan, specifically, that was part of the war in heaven, that even you could say kicked off or made it so Satan had an opposition to these things and started this war. Satan didn't approve of everything in the plan. And so this is certainly an issue that has caused heartache for a while. And so if it has been a source of confusion or a source of struggle in your life, understand that it is probably one of the deepest questions of life. Why do we have pain and suffering? And we don't pretend like we're going to do it complete justice and we're going to get through everything, but we want to talk through some of the items we see and some of the things that we believe that at least help us have some bigger picture level of understanding associated with this world that we live in. So in looking at it, one of the major things that I think we all know just from experience here in this life, and so if we started a place where there's kind of a given, one is that people have agency. So whether we like it or not right now, we're in a world where I can choose to do something. And because I can choose to do something, the power exists that me or someone else can choose to harm. And that is something that, again, when we experience, causes deep consternation. And we start asking, why did you let this happen? We start asking God, why did he let this happen? But again, coming back to this notion of agency, we look around in the world as a parent, before you're a parent, you're often judgmental about people with kids, and you look at them and go, why aren't their kids better behaved? And then you become a parent, and at some point you start to realize your kids do what they want to do. And they don't follow you exactly. They don't do all the things you would want them to. And they're human. They make choices and decisions. And so to me, the question of suffering then begs the question of why agency? Why did God put us in a state where I could choose to do things even that harmed? Why did he give me agency? And what is the purpose in that? And this question, I think, fundamentally ties into the war in heaven. Why agency? And what is it that God is looking to achieve or allow us to achieve through the exercise of agency and through the experience of living through the exercise of other people's agency? So, Michael, I'm curious, from your perspective, if you were to answer the question of why agency, what are some of the things that you would talk about with that?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because there's usually, when you talk about agency, you can see a lot of negatives, where people hurt people. And so you say, why do we allow that kind of thing? When you think about being able to act and make your own choices, you have to consider what would it look like in a world where you are restricted in the choices you can make based on the outcome. So if you couldn't choose to harm anybody, then your agency being restricted to that matter, what does it affect on the opposite end? If I can't choose to harm somebody, that means the only thing I can do is to be good to somebody, which sounds great, right? We're all just good to each other. And that can be fine if your goal, let's pretend you're the orchestrator of a world and you want everybody to treat each other kindly. That can be fine if you want that world to get along swimmingly and everybody to not hurt each other. You just take away the agency to hurt somebody, great. Now I've got this little world I've built that nothing bad is happening. But then you ask yourself the question, what is becoming of all the animals or the individuals or the things that are interacting? What are they becoming in a world like that? Are they learning? Are they growing? Or are they just interacting with these set of rules that you cannot injure each other? And you find out very quickly that if you don't have the choice to make a bad choice, that you very quickly can't learn to be better or to grow or to become something new. We talked on a number of podcasts ago, we talked about love and how love is a choice. It's only love when you've made a choice to love somebody. You can't say this person loves that person when that's their only option. Then it's not love. It's only love if it's something that person with their own agency has chosen to participate in. And that goes with a lot of things that we do in life. You're only a good person if those are the choices that you've made. You can't be good if you are forced to be good. You could be innocent, but you couldn't be good because you'd have to choose that. Somebody's only good when they make the choice. When they have the choice to do something awful and they have the choice to do something good and they choose good, we call that somebody who's good. If their only choice is good, that's not a good person. That's just a person who's following a path. And so, why agency to me is God was looking for us to be more than creatures interacting with each other and not injuring each other. He was looking for us to become something. And we only become something via choice, via I have an option to do these things. What am I going to choose to do? And if it's to make the better choice each time, to sacrifice of myself, to sacrifice for someone else, to help other people, then I'm becoming a better person. And there's a becoming involved. So for me, agency is all about a becoming. God has given us the opportunity to become something. And without agency, the becoming doesn't exist. We're again just animals interacting with each other in an environment that's been set up in a certain way.
Yeah, and I really like that focus on becoming. To me, it's part of life. And this is a question that I believe our society is wrestling with to some extent right now, maybe not even consciously. But can you be happy in life without progressing or without becoming something? And I'm talking kind of a deep, lasting happiness. You can certainly be happy, drinking for a time or eating all the food you want for a time or watching all the sports you want for a time. But most people I meet that have done things like that for a significant period of time find themselves feeling hollow or empty inside. And I remember just listening to people go, yeah, I don't even know what to watch anymore. It's all just so boring. And I'm fascinated by that because we live in an age where there is more entertainment than has ever existed before in the world's history. And we don't even know what to watch because it's all so boring. And that's a fascinating place to be. But I think it goes to your point of if we're sitting there just being entertained or living in this world of where everything's supposedly kind, is it even kind if we don't have the choice? It's just what we have to do. I have to interact with you this way. I have to say something nice. But then is there any value to it? Does it mean anything at that point? And this goes back to the question about love. If God was going to create a world where you could experience love, then you had to be able to truly be in a condition where you could experience the other thing. The meaning to life, the happiness, the purpose comes from the fact that you made a choice or someone else made a choice. And humans search deeply in their lives, kind of roam the world over searching for love. They want to find it in their movies and their shows and their books and their life. And they go to great lengths for it. And what they're searching for is they're saying, it's almost a form of identity to say, am I worth someone else's choice to choose to be with me, to choose to stay with me? And we search for that. And we search for someone that values us above themselves. But the only way we know that and the only way we find that is through experiencing the reality of when others don't. And so even words like nice or kind or happy, what makes us happy? It's really a state of progression. Are we progressing? Are we becoming? That's fulfilling. That brings something lasting and rewarding with it. If we don't have that, if we're just there and it's just told us, this is what you do today, and you don't have a choice, you can't think otherwise, you can't do otherwise, then we're stuck in this spot that's limited. And to me, I really stop seeing a delineation between life and robotics at that point. If agency is removed from us and it's cut to say you can't think these things, to me, we stop being alive, fully alive. And God sent us here specifically to gain life. And one of the things that I think is a very important point to remember with any of this, God didn't send us down just to suffer and laugh at us. The fact that suffering exists was so critical to the plan overall that God himself came down and suffered with us. And to me, that's one of the most important points of all this to remember. God didn't ask us to come here and do something. He said, this is what it takes to be like me, and I will do it too. He wasn't exempt from his own experience or exempt from the experience he gave us. He wanted life to its fullest. And he pursued that and worked for that and suffered more than all of us. And he also told us we didn't have to suffer alone. One of the amazing teachings and principles of Christianity is that God suffered for our sins, the things we do wrong, but he also suffered for the things that people do wrong to us. And he knows our pains. He experienced those. He went through those in the Garden of Gethsemane when he suffered and bled from every pore. He was experiencing the pains, the heartache, and the trauma, the different things of what goes on. He was abused by the Romans. He was abused by the Jews. He was killed on a cross. And all these things were because there's actually a purpose to suffering. And it goes, I think, back to the heart of what you talked about, Michael, with becoming. I remember a story from, I guess there's plenty of stories as I think about it. Think of a forest fire. a forest fire comes through and burns something down, and then new life can start. Something bad can give life to something good and new. And the thing about God, when we say, why does God allow suffering to happen? If we turn to God in our suffering or trials, God has the power to make something good come from anything bad that's possible. And that's the power that I believe God utilizes when he has a fullness of life and a fullness of power. He doesn't use his power to take life away from us, to take the experience of becoming away from us. But he says, no matter what you experience in life, I can turn it into something good. I can take it and build and help you become something so much more than you would have ever been. And I find this principle very interesting in our current country currently. As we grow richer and richer, I know so many people that say, I want to give my kids a good start. I want to pay for their education. I want to make sure they don't have to work through school. I want to make sure they're not stressed about getting their first home. They say all these different things. But what they're doing is they're removing the aspect of becoming from the child. And then we have a society of people who are anxious, depressed, lacking a sense of fulfillment or purpose. And I look at that and say, I think there's a connection there. As we grow richer and as we try and remove obstacles from our children's lives, they don't become as much as we did. They're not happy anymore. They're anxious. They're depressed. And experiencing opposition, experiencing things and having to work through it and deal with it helps us become. And that helps us be happy. We don't exist in a vacuum. We don't and we don't just live. And I don't believe life is the state in which we can just sit there and eat cookies and feel happy. Again, talking on a long-term scale, if I just eat cookies every day, it stops being fulfilling at some point because there's no progression. And we can only progress if we're overcoming something. If there's some challenge or obstacle or trial associated with it, it's kind of like climbing a mountain. It's walking. I can get online and I can see the picture of what it looks like from the top of a peak, but that doesn't bring me any happiness or fulfillment. But doing the work, going through the pain and difficulty of walking up the mountain and experiencing it and sitting there and then having the memory of that accomplishment creates far more satisfaction than looking at the picture. And I feel that in life, we often want to get the reward from being on top of the mountain without doing the work to climb up the mountain. And that's, to me, something that we skip over as we look at a life without suffering. We say, but how do we get to the top of the mountain? How do we experience the joy of doing work and achieving something? Michael, do you have comments or thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, to piggyback off of the idea of fulfillment, working towards something, there's a book by Brandon Mole. It's called The World Without Heroes, and in it, he has one of the characters who's, this is kind of a typical fantasy situation where there's some place that you can go and you can have all you want of almost anything you want. But you find that it's difficult or impossible to escape from a place. It's a pretty common fantasy theme. But this one character is in a place like that, and he's speaking to another character that's just arrived, and he's talking about indulgence, trying to find happiness in just getting things, eating, sleeping, playing whatever games you want to play, doing whatever you want to do. He says, indulgence is emptiness. I've probed the limits with food and frivolity. There is no real fulfillment in meaningless rushes of pleasure. You try to conceal the emptiness with more extravagance, only to find the thrills becoming less satisfying and more fleeting. Most pleasures are best as a seasoning, not the main course. However you try to disguise it, you end up feeding without being nourished. So the other character asks him, so why would you stay here? He says, empty or not, the lifestyle is addictive. It breeds a fear of real life. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is we get to this point where you talk about setting the runway out for your children so they don't have to do all those difficult things that you had to go through. You didn't enjoy it. But what that breeds is an addicting lifestyle that is not fulfilling, and it just breeds a fear of real life. You became what you were because of the challenges you overcame. And then you turn around to your children and you try to remove those challenges and then expect them to become as you are. And in your, what you mentioned, Christ coming down to earth and fulfilling the atonement, he didn't do all the tough work and then turn around and remove things, all the difficulties from us. He said, I'm going to be here with you. I'm going to participate in these things. I'm going to suffer and feel everything you're going to suffer and feel so I can be here with you and understand it as well. But you have something you need to become. I'm not just going to remove these difficulties because it's something that you have to overcome so that you can become a better person. And sometimes it's easy in our really nice lives that we have today in this world, in the Western world especially, where we have all kinds of great luxuries available to us. There's a lot of complaining about how bad we have it, but just to think of the incredible luxuries we have with vehicles and technology and the internet, and it's easy to look at challenges today and think some of these challenges are hard. Things like I had to work to pay for something, where you can look back through history and their sufferings and challenges far exceeded anything we'll ever go through. And sometimes people experience really difficult things, especially in this world's history. And it's hard to say, was that really necessary? We understand the importance of trials and working hard. Was it really necessary for this person to suffer those kinds of atrocities? And I think it goes back to what we're saying about Christ. He suffered all of those atrocities plus his own. He didn't shirk any of that. And he said, I will provide a way for you to overcome that. This plan that began with the war in heaven isn't just the war in heaven and this earth. There's more to it. And I think human agency that causes suffering makes more sense when you think of this earth as only being part of the stage. There's more to it that comes. And your becoming here will just continue after this life. One other quick thing on the same topic, Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, talked about the differences between human beings who make good choices, human beings who make bad choices. He said, trying to find the one where he talked about humans will choose to do some good things, other humans choose to do bad good things. What's the difference? Why is that a thing? And he says, our generation is realistic, for we have come to know man as he really is. After all, man is that being who invented the gas chambers at Auschwitz. However, he is also that being who entered those gas chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer on his lips. He really contrasts what agency does for us. We become the people who build the gas chambers, or you are the person who entered that standing straight up, praying to God. And it highlights the power that your agency has to affect who you are. Because now you look at the people differently. The person who walks into the gas chamber or the person who builds it, they are different people because of their agency and their choice. And it wasn't the suffering that defined them.
Yeah, and I think it's, again, part of the reason why we struggle so much with the suffering side is because I think like you're talking about, there's some pieces we don't see. To the person who walks up right into the gas chamber with the Lord's Prayer on their lips and they die, we don't see what becomes of them after. And so we have this very limited view of life and existence. We can certainly see some things that suffering and heartache has done for us here on this earth. But in the grand scheme of things, there's a couple pieces that ultimately, I think, to really accept suffering and agency in life, we have to understand that God's plan that predated the war in heaven includes a few other pieces to it that help work through all this. One is that there is justice for anyone who does something wrong to others. If we don't repent and we don't seek to be clean of the things we've done wrong, we will suffer for the things that we've done to others. God doesn't just say, oh, go do whatever you want, guys, and oh, too bad for you. You got injured by someone or hurt by someone. That's not the way it works. There is serious consequences for this, eternal type consequences associated with it. And we have a very sacred duty to exercise and use our agency correctly. In this life, we feel like we're free from God. But that's one of the tests is if we don't feel God watching over our shoulder, if we don't see him looking at us constantly, then what do we do? And this is something that, it goes to the heart of, well, who are you? Who you are is probably dictated by what you do with your free time. When nobody's around, nobody's watching, what are you doing? And are you choosing to be productive, to create, to build, or are you doing things that you know are wrong or not proper? If no one's looking, do you take the $100 bill sitting on the table? And do you look at images you shouldn't? Do you consume things you shouldn't? What is it that's taking place during those times? And we are here to say, who are we? And so one of the pieces of that is the fact that God has justice set in course. But on the second side of it, there's this piece where, again, going back to the atonement, God can actually heal us. And I think about the situation of when the soldiers came to get Jesus to take him to be crucified, or to take him to be judged, I guess. The one apostle cuts off the soldier's ear with a sword, and Jesus immediately reaches out and heals it. And so the man felt pain, but then was healed of it. And in this life, again, not to downplay at all suffering or things, because there are things I think that many people experience that go on and on and on, and that you deal with pain from for a very long time. But in the grand scheme of things, if we live billions of years and we live for eternities, this life is a very small drop in the bucket of eternity. It's a very small testing grounds. And overall, as we look back at our life, I remember serious pain I suffered as a child, broken bones, different things. I can still look at scars and, things like that. And for example, I have this one pinky finger. This one's a little deformed. I can still look at that and know it was broke at one time. You can see a little bump from it, but I will often look at that and reflect, that really hurt when it happened, but that pain is gone. And I can remember there was pain, but it's something that doesn't continue to affect me or impact me. And I see that with my children. They break bones, they do different things. And that pain, you can be healed from it completely. And that's one of the interesting things about life, is going back to this notion of life. Once we experience pain, so the soldier gets his ear cut off, Jesus heals it. What do we do at that point? And yes, I'm not saying that means that, you're going to be healed instantly from things. But I'm talking about in the big scheme of things with the resurrection that takes place, Jesus came down to do two things. He came down to suffer for us, but he was also being resurrected. And we'll get into this more in the next episode as we talk about things. But we get a perfect body at some point, and it's healed. We can get over our emotional scars, our mental scars, all the things that have gone wrong. God has a way to make those up, to heal us. And even we believe strongly there are rewards for choosing the right still, in spite of things we suffer. And the biggest part of that reward is we become something. We become something and someone that can experience life to the fullest, that can live in a state, in a condition where happiness can truly be eternal. And it can be there. It's not a hollow thing. It's not something that, breeds addiction or whatnot. We stay alive. We stay very active and vibrant. And so to me, when we look at suffering and God, I I don't believe that God just allows suffering. He put an incredible amount of work into addressing the notion of suffering to the point where he suffered himself. But again, that suffering is a necessary component of our progression, of our becoming something, and of our experiencing the deepest joys that life can bring, because you will never experience love, true love, in a state where people can't harm you. If there's not the option to harm, there's not the ability to feel love. And so God knows of the incredible nature of what we're pursuing. He knows what can be achieved. And so he asks us to come to this earth for a time to experience some of these things. But he has so much he's put in place to make up for it and to prepare for it. And so to me, when you ask the question of how can God allow suffering, you have to look at God as a complete picture. You can't just take one piece in isolation and say, oh, that would never exist. Well, then why would Christianity teach about Christ's suffering? Why would we teach about punishment and reward and different things associated with it, unless there's more to this picture than just some suffering or something going on? Michael, do you have any thoughts or comments as we wrap up today?
No, I think you tied that up pretty well. When we talk about agency between human beings and the choices, it comes down to our ability to choose and also God's plan of making up for things that go wrong, helping us heal, there being consequences to our actions. You've got to look at the whole picture when you talk about pain. It's a difficult subject, but you can't just focus on that and say there's nothing else to discuss. God has a whole plan for us, and each part has a purpose and meaning, and they all tie together to make his plan work.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And thanks for joining us today. And we will follow up more next week to talk some additional items about essentially the state of this earth, why we have bad things that happen, calamities and other things that take place, viruses, cancer, all those types of things. And that will tie more into the second half of this subject, which is a broad one. And again, there's so much more to it than we're talking about here, but we're trying to highlight a few of the things that we see and feel. So thanks for joining us. But remember, God loves you. He has a plan, and you have a place and a purpose in it. You came here specifically for a reason, and that reason is to become something. And so if we turn to God and trust in him, we can become. And any bad thing that happens, he can truly turn into something good and for our benefit. And so thanks for joining us, and we will talk more again in the next episode.